Welcome back to this video about onion architecture. In this video today we're going to talk about how we're going to perform a lot of the logic that we left out of the video last time around. So in the first video about REST APIs we performed type validation and we performed some mapping and stuff, but last time around we basically just created an empty solution that had all of the dependencies set up, but we left out all of the contents of the application. So this application basically doesn't do anything at all. And we're gonna make it do some stuff now. But the big theme today is, where do we put what things? The first big obstacle is that your controllers can sometimes end up becoming very bloated. A lot of things can go inside of a controller because this is the first point you reach when you send a request to the web server, but we don't want to put everything inside of the controller. A lot of things like validation and also mapping we might be more interested in putting inside of the application layer. So the application layer contains the service methods, and for some people the service methods end up becoming a kind of pass-through layer. And there isn't inherently anything wrong with having something that doesn't always add to the application. So imagine sometimes you might end up using a service method and sometimes the service method just calls the repository. We need to be consistent about how we do things in our application. So inside of the controller here, we're not going to start calling the repository just because some methods don't use the service for anything. We want to have the same line through the entire application, even though some endpoints actively use service logic and others simply use the service logic to get to the repository. But we're going to talk about some of the things that we left out last time. And what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce some of the packages that we did not install. So first off, we have FluentValidation. We can go ahead and install FluentValidation to the application project. And another thing we're going to do is we're going to put AutoMapper in here. I'm not going to explain a whole lot about AutoMapper and FluentValidation because the previous videos introduced these concepts. Now we're just talking about how we're going to use it inside of onion architecture. And now I'm going to make some folders here. So first of all, I'll make a directory called validators, and I'll make a directory called DTOs. So notice how the DTOs and the validators are now inside of a different project than first time we used them. Well, that's because first time we used them we didn't have the application layer. And because we didn't have the application layer and we didn't want to put it into the domain because they're not business entities, and we for sure don't want to put them inside of infrastructure because they're not concerned about our externalities, we had to put them inside of the API. But this time around we can put them somewhere where they belong because this is business logic, right? Performing type validation is something that we care about no matter what the user interface is. It doesn't matter if it's a REST API or if it's a desktop application or whatever it is. We're gonna use this in any case. So I'm gonna make something that's called product dtos.cs here. And inside of product dtos.cs we can make a class called post product DTO, and we can just put the same stuff in as we did the first time around. So there's going to be public int I price get set and public string name get set. And in order to actually start using our DTOs, we need to use some kind of mapping. And we installed AutoMapper. So we can go into program.cs and now we can configure AutoMapper. And because API knows about application, API is the outer layer, and the application is right inside of API. API also knows about AutoMapper. So we can go and configure AutoMapper right here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the builder.services. And what we're going to write is builder.services.add singleton, like this. And inside of this method, we're going to put the mapper object. So we can call it mapper, and then we're going to instantiate a new mapper configuration like this. We can just do like this. And then we write configuration.createMap. And then we're gonna put the DTO class we just created and the original domain entity right next to it. So I'm gonna write post product DTO and product. Like this. And then we can write create mapper. And we put mapper in here. So this is not anything new yet, and we really haven't used the mapper so far. But let's go into the controller. And we have this HTTP GET. Let's make another endpoint, HTTP post, and we can call this one public product create new product. Return product service create new product. And inside of this one, we're gonna put post product DTO. We're gonna call this one DTO, and we're just gonna send this DTO to the service. So now the service accepts a data transfer object. And if we create a new method here, it's gonna go into the interface. And this interface needs to know about the DTO. And because the DTO is not considered as a domain entity, we actually need to move the interface. So we're gonna do something that seems a little crazy now, and that is we're gonna take the interface that exists inside of domain and we're gonna put it inside of application. And this is also a very common way to do the onion architecture. If you go back now, we can see now we know about it. And we have the iProduct repository and iProduct service residing in the interfaces folder inside of application. And now we can go into the product service which implements this interface, and now we can perform some kind of logic here where we map the DTO to the actual product. So at the end of the day, we're gonna get to the product repository, and we're gonna write create new product, and inside of here we're actually gonna give it an actual product and not just a DTO for the product. So the thing we're gonna write now is we're gonna write the actual mapping. The actual mapping we need to use a mapper for. So if we go into the constructor here, we say IMapper mapper. We're gonna import this. We're gonna make an instance variable, and we're gonna set this instance variable equals to this object here. So we get this one from the program.cs. This right here, we're adding it as a singleton. And now we can use it from here. So we go into create new product, and then we say mapper, then we say map a product based on the DTO. And then we can create a method inside of the interface for the repository. Say public product create new product. Just name this one product. And then if we go into the infrastructure, it'll let us know we need to implement this one. So we can just return product. So we haven't added a database yet. So it doesn't really matter what it does in here because this is just returning some product. But you see, now we actually have some logic inside of our product service instead of just having a pass-through layer. And we're also going to add some more logic in here, because what we're interested in doing is validating this data transfer object. The way that we validate it is we go into our validators. I think we put this one in a wrong directory. We'll just move this one. And now we go into validators, add product validators.cs. And inside of product validators.cs, we can just create a validator called post product validator. Implements abstract validator of post product DTO. And then we can make a constructor here, public post product validator rule for, and then we make this little expression here, p.name must, like this, it's not empty, rule for p.price greater than 0. And now if we have this validator here, we need to use this somehow. So we're gonna go back into the program.cs, and inside of program.cs we also need to add validations. But there is a better way to add validators, because we're gonna have a lot of different validators. And all of these different validators, we're not interested in making a new line for each of them. Here with the DTOs, we actually have to map the DTOs. So every single time we have a new DTO, we need to add a line here. So let's say there was a product to product DTO. We would have to do that because right now this is a DTO to a product, but it could also go the other way around, and so on. But it's a little easier with the validator. So in order to get started with using the validator, we need to install a NuGet package, and it's called FluentValidation.dependency injection extensions. And we're gonna add this one just to the API. And we can do this in a single line. It's called builder services add validation from assemblies. And what we're gonna put into this method is app domain dot current domain dot get assemblies, and that's it. So no matter how many validators we add, we don't have to write anything more than just this one line. And if we go back into our product service, now we have to use the validator by adding it through the constructor. So I can say private I validator post product DTO. We're gonna add this one, and I'm gonna call this one post validator. And inside of this constructor we'll write I validator post product DTO validator or post validator, and then we're gonna go post validator equals post validator, and we're gonna perform the validation here. And how we're gonna do this is we need to throw some kind of exception if the validation goes wrong. And why is it that we want to throw an exception now instead of just returning some kind of action result? Well, it's because we're inside of the product service. We don't have the things that the controller has. The controller can return a not found or a bad request, everything that has status codes. But we don't have these things inside of the service. We don't really know what calls a service. It could also be some kind of desktop application that makes use of this. We need to make sure that whatever we write inside of the service, it can be used for a lot of different purposes in the future. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna write var validation equals post validator dot validate DTO. And now we're going to have a conditional here. So we're going to say if validation dot is valid, and we can throw a new exception, throw new validation exception. And this validation exception should just contain the validation to string. So whatever is wrong, it let us know through this exception. And there is also something called validation exception inside of data annotations. That's not the one to use. You should use the one from Fluent API. And then if this conditional is false, then we're gonna go to the repository and create a new product. So if we go into the controller here, the method that creates a new product should of course be able to catch this exception. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna write try, and then we're gonna write product service create new product DTO catch validation exception, and then we can write return bad request, and we can give this validation exception a variable here, and then we can say e dot, and then we're gonna pick message here. And the reason why it's complaining now is because we're still returning a product and we need to be returning an action result. And then we can put product inside of this diamond bracket here. And what we can do here is if it's a successful creation, we should actually return what's called a 201 status code. Until now we've just been using 200 for everything. But when you create a new resource, what you should be returning is 201, and the name for that status code is created. And they actually want you to put two things inside of this method. One of the things is the actual result, and the other thing is the path to that result. So the path to this result would be product slash, then we're gonna give this one a name, var results equals product service dot create new product from a DTO result dot ID, then put the result here. And we can also catch in something else. So there is a chance that we're going to have a validation exception. But let's say that there is something wrong inside of the database when we create the new resource. We also want to catch that. So we can write catch exception e return status code 500 e.message. And the reason why I write this is because 500 means internal server error. So there's not inherently anything wrong with the request. There's something wrong with what we're doing inside of the backend. So this particular method we have here is an HTTP put. And when we use put, what we're telling the client is that whatever they send to us will completely replace whatever was there beforehand. So if we make a new product and this new product contains some properties, these properties will erase the entire product that was existent at this particular ID that they're sending us. So notice how there is something that comes from the route, it's the ID. So if we call, let's say, localhost port 5001/product/42, then product with ID 42 gets replaced by this product here. And where does this product come from? Well, if you open up Postman, then you can see inside of this section here, if you click body, click raw, and click JSON, this is what the new product is going to become when we send a put towards 42. And of course, what we are interested in doing is triggering some kind of update action inside of the database. But updating a thing inside of a database, it consists of several different steps. First of all, when we update something, we don't go straight to the database. We should first go to the service, and then the service is responsible for calling the repository. So we call the service with the ID and the product. Right now I don't use a DTO, and why don't I use a DTO? Because Essentially, when we have a put request, we're interested in creating a completely new product, which means that all properties must be present on the product. You could also make an HTTP put that only creates a new username or whatever. But for this instance, we're interested in creating a completely new product at a certain ID. So whatever the service returns to us, we need to be able to handle that. That's why we wrap this one in a try catch, because what if someone updates some ID that isn't existing inside of the database? Well, then we're going to get an exception. And what exception would that be? Well, that would be a key not found exception, because this is the key, and if it's not found, we need to catch this exception, and then we need to return to the client that whatever they specified to update was not found. There is also a certain possibility that anything else might go wrong, so we have something that's just called exception here. So this one will catch a lot of different things, and we're just going to return 500 status code to say that this is an internal server error, and then we're going to print the error to string and send back to the client. But let's take a look at the update product method. It's inside of the product service. And first of all, what we do here is we figure out, is the ID inside of the body actually the same as the ID that was sent in the route? So if they're trying to access some route and the ID inside of this route is not the same as the ID in the product, well, we're not interested in updating the product, because what if they're trying to update something that they don't have permission to? It's not very probable, but still we would like to make sure that whatever we're updating is the desired ID, and if there is a discrepancy, there might be something wrong. Second of all, we're going to perform the validation. So we have a product validator here. It's not a particular type of product DTO, it's just a simple product validator. And then in case the validation fails, we're going to throw a new validation exception, and then afterwards we're going to go and update the product. So the update product is inside of the database. And typically what you would do is you could fetch the item from the database, and then you could change all of the properties or just the properties that you want, and then reinsert it into the database. But right now we're interested in just erasing the entire product and replacing it with something new. So we can just straight away call update. The other way around, if we just want to update one specific property, we would have to get the product out of the database by finding it by ID and then changing that one property and then putting it into the database again. But in that instance, we wouldn't have a put method. That would be what we would consider a patch method. If we go back into the controller, if then one says HTTP patch, what we're signaling here is that some of the properties inside of product are going to be updated, but not the entire product. And in that instance, we would perform some other action in the database, because we're only supposed to change some properties.